Well, I just wanted to welcome everyone to our June 2026 um, Buyers Bootcamp with Rich Cordova. And today we're going to be discussing the basics of going from renting to owning. So, Rich, introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself and your contact information.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rich Cordova. I'm a local mortgage broker here in the southern Utah area. My brokerage is True Rate Home Loans. You can see me online at trhomeloans.com, and you can always give me a call at 435-669-8003. And yeah, Dave, I'm pretty excited. This is a topic that I'm always, happy to talk about. It's always a great experience to help first-time homeowners, make that leap from renting to home ownership. So I'm glad to be here with you today.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, let's start off with just kind of the basics. A lot of times when people are renters, in their minds, they're thinking, we've got to rent another place because our, landlord just ran out our lease and whatever. And to go into another rental, let's say the rental's $2,000 a month, and which is kind of standard around here. It might be a little bit higher than some of them, but $2,000 a month. And a lot of times for a renter, the lease will call for a first and last month with deposits and everything. So that's $4,000 right off the bat, out the pocket. And then, there's other security issues, dogs, things like that might even add to that cost. So it can cost anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 for an average renter to get into a rental in southern Utah. And I say that because our vacancy factor, we're basically less than 3% most of the time. So rentals are hard to find in southern Utah, and then it's going to cost a lot. So let's just take $6,000 as a rough moving expense or move-in expense cost, which is probably on the high side. But can that same client get into a home with somewhere around $6,000 down?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Honestly, right now, one of the biggest opportunities is there's not been as many programs as available as there is right now today, at least over the last few years, for like first-time homeowners that allow like no down payment. Now, even with a no down payment, I still encourage people to have a little bit of money set aside for closing costs and other things. So,
Yeah.
Where Dave's saying, hey, it's going to cost $4,000 to $6,000 just to go rent a new place. I think that is something important to bring up, that a lot of times, potential homeowners don't realize that same $4,000 to $6,000 could actually get them into a house. So, yeah, that's a really good solid point that you bring up there.
Yeah, and so not every case does this work, but in a lot of cases, I do see that this is where my time home buyers have kind of been in that situation. And a lot of times they can get into owning a home for about the same as what it costs to go into a rental. Now, the one thing that's certain is that whether you're paying rent or paying a mortgage, you're paying someone's mortgage. If you own a home, you're paying your own mortgage. If you're renting a home, you're paying the landlord's mortgage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, kind of one thing that you want to take a look at is obviously if you can get out there and you can replace your rent with a mortgage payment that's the exact same amount, you're going to be leagues ahead, because obviously that mortgage payment is, gaining equity most likely. You've got, home ownership, the pride of home ownership. You can have pets, you can paint walls, all the great things that go along with that. Now, realistically, like at least from what I'm seeing, and maybe Dave can correct me, but it does seem like most times the mortgage payment is slightly higher than maybe what you're paying for rent. And what I encourage people to look at there is realize a portion of that mortgage payment that you're making is a principal payment. So, that's in a ways almost like a forced savings account, because even if we don't account on any appreciation, which we know historically is something that we can kind of bank on, just that forced savings account of paying appreciation or paying principal each month really does add up, especially over, a 10-year period or something like that. So, it may be one of those things where the mortgage payment is a little bit higher than what you're paying in rent, but that's something where you still need to take a look at it. If you can afford that payment, it most likely makes sense to take that leap into home ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll give a quick story about just my own personal background in this. We've owned several homes, sold several homes. And I remember when we had moved to San Diego, um, we rented at first because we weren't sure where we wanted to live and whatnot. And we rented in a neighborhood. And I think this is way back, but the rent was $1,200 a month, as I remember. And it seemed absorbent to me at the time because I was moving from out of San Diego, but it wasn't. That was how much it was. And 3 bedroom, 2 bath, in a nice neighborhood, not a great neighborhood, but it wasn't like in the middle of the hood with, shootings every night and stuff like that. No, it was in a nice neighborhood. And so about a year into it, maybe 2 years, I had been in sales. I've always been in sales. I wasn't in real estate yet at that time, but I was in construction sales where I was basically selling construction jobs, kitchen remodels, and stuff like that. So I'd have big months and I would have small months. And I remember once on a big month, I'm like, we should probably buy a house. And we looked into the whole thing. We had about 20 grand to put down, which to me was a sizable amount. And I don't remember, but homes were, I think, around 250 or 300,000 then. And to me, it just seemed astronomical. And the whole thing was like, I don't know if I really want to do this again. We'd owned 2 homes and sold 2 homes. And then I kind of looked at the fact that rents are constantly going up. So we bit the bullet. We bought a home actually in the same neighborhood. And like you say, you can have pets and you can paint the walls. So painting the walls is a big deal for my wife. Having pets was a big deal for me. So we moved into that house, and within 2 years, rents were up to 1,400. Within another 2 years, they were up to 1,600. 2 years after that, they were up to $2,000. And my mortgage payment was $1,400. So it was $200 more than my original rent. And man, I just looked back and went, because by the time it had gone up to $2,000 a month for rents, I'm like, I don't know that I would have been that comfortable with that, because my income had gone up, but it's like, you're always looking at that going, that's a big expense. So yeah, when you look back at it, you're always in hindsight, it's 2020. It seems like, a really good deal to go into it. We used to have more of a tax incentive for first-time home buyers, and I do want to address this because back in 2016, I believe it was 2016, President Trump passed a deal where there's $15,000 worth of write-offs right off the top for, if you're in a certain income bracket and stuff like that, and almost to the exclusion of interest on a home. So if I remember right, I think it comes out to about if you have a home that's 750 or more and you're taking out a loan on it, then it's actually beneficial right now too. But there's a certain threshold where that $15,000 worth of write-offs that are already granted to you blanket covers the fact that you're not writing off the interest because it's not going to achieve more than that. Something to that effect anyway. But it used to be where when we show the interest versus, paying rent, it was a no-brainer because you could actually deduct that interest on your, whatever it is, a W-2, and so that your monthly income would remain the same when you owned a house, even though you were paying more for it. So it's not quite the same thing, but the ownership and the benefits of ownership are exactly the same, have always been the same. And let's face it, this is how 90% of the people in the US, they, earn equity through that. And so by the time you're 50 or 60, the house is paid off for a young family anyway, going through that period in time. And so that's a substantial part of their portfolio in most cases. So there's a lot of benefits that aren't initially seen going from renting to homeowning. But I've had the privilege of watching several of my first-time home buyers. In fact, we just sold a house in Apple Valley for a first-time home buyer where the house value actually tripled, and they did do some remodeling, so it wasn't just the value of the property going up that much, but it had tripled in, I want to say, 8 years. Actually, it was 9 years because their daughter's 9 years old, and their daughter was born the day after they closed. So yeah, and they were able to, from a job change, they're having to move to Texas, and they were able to buy that next home for cash from the proceeds of the sale of their home. How cool is that?
Yeah, that's honestly for me, that's the big statistic that really stands out for me as well is, you and I have both been doing this long enough that over the extended period of time, you really see where, in the statistics show it with people's net worths. If someone's a homeowner versus non-homeowner, the net worth numbers are way different. And realistically, you see that play out over a decade. Over a decade, somebody's paying their bills. Yes, maybe they're putting some money aside, but really that gain in equity in their home when they go and are able to sell that, and now all of a sudden they're retiring and downsizing, and they've got this nest egg to kind of work with. You and I have both seen that play out in people's lives, and it really does make a huge difference. So that's why I'm always such a big proponent on home ownership. I know that you can get into the weeds about, well, I could invest over here and invest over here. But at the end of the day, it's one of those expenses most people, you have to pay to live somewhere. So
Yeah.
it's an expense you're going to have to incur. And we see the impact that it has on people's life over, an extended period of time. So that's why, I love having this conversation. It's always exciting to get renters into homes. And, you've seen it play out, 10 years later, you're selling that home, you're hoping to do some other things that they would never be able to do if they didn't have that equity from that first home that they purchased. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, it takes a little bit of patience, but like you say, you got to pay to live somewhere anyway. So I mean, it's like, why not be paying your own mortgage and be paying it down? And I mean, the way bank loans work is that you do pay a higher percentage of interest up front, and then that decreases as it goes. So you're not making as much principal payment on the front end of a loan as you are towards the latter end of that loan. But it's irrelevant because you still have to pay to live somewhere anyway, and you're still building up equity in the home. And let's say the market crashes for a while because, every 10 or 20 years, we do have a dip in the market. So let's say the housing market dipped by 10%. Yeah, you still have to live somewhere. And so it's something that you really just can ignore because it'll come back at some point in time. I think the thing that I try to coach first-time home buyers away from is this idea that if we live there for 2 years, we can sell it for a profit and then move on to the next one. And if fundamentally that's really what they want to do, it may or may not happen because in 2 years, that house can go up in value, it can go down in value. That's not a surefire thing. And I've had many clients that have done that and they've been successful with it. Most of the time it's flipping the house, they're fixing something up. But that takes its toll too, because when you're fixing up a place that you're living in, it's a whole nother stress level that not all marriages can endure. But the reality is, if you're in it for the long haul, you've got to pay to live somewhere anyway, gosh, it's a no-brainer. Now, let's say that you're a young couple and you are facing getting transferred out of the area. So if it's after 2 years, of course, if it's profitable to sell the house, you can sell the house. If it's not profitable to sell the house at that time, you can usually rent it for more than what your mortgage payment is, or at least close to what your mortgage payment is. And I know in our background, we have done this with a couple of our houses where, I had a job transfer, I had to move to another area, and we decided to rent out the house. And at first it might have been like upside down just a little bit, but then within 2 years it was even, and then 2 years it was making money. And there's a whole lot that goes into that whole process. But the bottom line is, people say, real estate's not that liquid. And in a sense, I would agree with that, because it's not like, like in the stock market, you can sell something from your portfolio and get the money in 4 days or 5 days, or, whatever it may be. And real estate's not necessarily that way, but it is liquid in the sense that it gives you options. And if you need to rent your house out, move to another place and rent there until it's a better opportune time to sell your property, and then use that money for a new house, so be it. That's always something that's on the back burner. And the same for the people who are flipping a house in 2 years. If they, let's say, have everything done and they're ready to flip the house in 2 years and the market takes a dive, they can still live there. They've got to live somewhere, or they can use it as a rental and leverage that eventually to move on to maybe a bigger or a nicer home or something like that. But anyway, real estate has options. It's not like you're locked into something that is just a ball and chain, and I'm sure you coach people all the time on the loan aspect of it. We're going to switch gears a little bit here, but there's variable rate loans and there's fixed loans. There's 30-year mortgages, there's 15-year mortgages. Generally speaking, where do you see most of your clients getting funneled into from those options?
Yeah, I'd say primarily with first-time home buyers, or people that rent or are looking to buy their first home. Usually, it's pretty standard, 30-year fixed. Sometimes we'll see FHA. Obviously, if they're a veteran, we can see some VA loans. But I don't see a lot of like variable loan products and things of that nature, just because a lot of times those, are kind of a little bit more complicated, assume a little bit more risk, and that's not usually the ideal client for those situations. But with that, like I said, the big thing that I would encourage is, kind of to Dave's point, is there are a lot of different options, and you want to have those conversations so you can kind of work out the different options that are available to you. If you're looking to buy a house and you're going to only be there for 2 years, then we can strategize, with Dave and myself on how to finance that. And, whether it's going to be, hey, we're going to sell it in 2 years, or, hey, 2 years, let's see where the market's at, and maybe we need to rent it for a little while, with the idea that if the market's kind of cooled off, well, that provides an opportunity to go out and buy something, maybe renting that home out for a while you go take advantage of a buyer's market, and then selling the home when the market kind of shifts the other direction. There's a lot of different things you can do. Like I said, I would just encourage people to have those conversations, get your questions answered, because you take that first step, and I'm a big proponent, like I said, of home ownership. You'd be surprised, some of the things that maybe you think are standing in your way, credit, down payment, usually there's a solution to it. So just, take those steps.
Yeah. And with credit, just be frank with the audience here about credit qualifications. Like, where are you seeing kind of the minimum, median, minimum to median credit score?
I would say the minimum is usually going to be about a 580. There are options to go below that, so I say usually, but I mean lower than that, it's then just going to be dependent on looking at the overall credit and looking at more specific things. Do they have collections that are over $2,000 cumulative? Like, there's different things we'll look at that point. So you definitely want to have it above a 580, but realize credit scores, it's not, that's a fluid thing. We can take a look at your credit score, and we can actually even do what's called a rapid rescore, where all that is we take a look at your credit score and we say, hey, did you know if we paid down this loan balance by $200 and we paid down this balance another $300, that would boost your score 40 points. And we'll document that the new balances are that. We'll have the bureaus run a rapid rescore, and then we'll have a new score that we can work with. So So that's what I'm saying. Credit is usually something that, we can come up with solutions. And sometimes the solution is we need to wait a little longer, but that's worst case. Worst case is like, hey, we need to wait 6 months from this credit event before you can qualify. Or, there's usually like hard money options or things like that, but that's always having to weigh out, do I pay a higher interest rate with like a hard money loan, or do I wait till I qualify with more traditional financing? And that's all boiled down to like opportunity cost. If you can wait and get the better rate and you don't need to move today, that can sometimes be better. Sometimes it's like there's such a good deal on this property, we need to figure out how to make it work today. So
Yeah.
again, lots of different ways to look at it.
Yeah, and each case is so individual and so separate that's why first time home buyers, they need people like you and me, because there's a lot of creativity involved in this, because there's a lot of different options, and really hearing someone's story, where they're at, what their goals are, what their finances are, makes a lot of difference. And so a lot of times when I'll be in contact with a first time home buyer, I'll always tell them the first step, get a hold of Rich, because, invariably 90% of first-time home buyers tell me, oh, we're not going to have a problem qualifying. We've got great credit. We've got income, all this stuff. And they already know that they meet those boundaries. My advice, get a hold of Rich right away,
Yeah,
because there are still a ton of variables and it might take some time to work out.
yeah, and if they come to me and they're already under contract, of course we're going to figure that out. But
Yeah.
at the same time, to your point, it's way less stressful if we've already kind of ironed out all the potential issues with financing, and now we know as soon as you go under contract, we're just kind of going through the process. So
Yeah.
it's
And
definitely good to start. Give me a call, we can figure things out, and then Dave can go out there and find you that perfect home.
And as a realtor, this is not going to be real popular, but I typically, for the last 23 years, don't take people out until they are pre-qualified. And I tell them this up front, but I tell them the reason is because I don't want you to find the perfect house and then find out you need to wait 6 months to qualify for it because of some glitch somewhere that maybe is unforeseen. Because that heartache of looking back on what you could have had is brutal in real estate from the real estate agent's perspective. So I'd rather have all the ducks in a row. It's not like it costs anything. It's not like it's, doing anything other than a little bit of paperwork. But I'd rather have all the ducks in a row so that when they do find something they're excited about, boom, we can move on it. And I think that's a, real important thing. And maybe I'm more, I don't know. Maybe
No,
I,
I think it is important. I think it can get overlooked because, if they end up ultimately qualifying anyways, then it wasn't an issue. But to your
right.
point, if somebody finds a house and now they can't qualify, those situations are devastating. They're heartbreaking. Not only for the buyer, for the seller as well, because you have people that are making big plans. They've got moving companies, they've got friends and family maybe coming out to help them. There's a lot of moving parts, and if things don't follow through, there's a lot of heartbreak involved with that. So
Yeah.
we obviously, we pride ourselves up front in making sure that if, hey, we say we can do it, that you can go out there and we can make it happen. So yeah, have the conversation up front. Don't shy away if there's things where you're like, I don't know if I could qualify. Let's figure out exactly what you're waiting on if you are waiting, because a lot of times, like I said, it may be I don't have enough down. Well, you may not realize you do have enough down. Your credit, you might not think you have good enough credit, but realistically, we may be able to take a look at it, and with just paying a few balances down just slightly, now all of a sudden that credit isn't an issue. So if you're wanting to make home ownership a real thing and you're just kind of on the fence about how to do it, we're happy to help you along with that process.
Yeah. And it is different for, each client. So each one has different criteria that will be there. But there's a lot of misconceptions about what it takes to qualify. And I won't say it's easy to qualify, because banks have definitely clamped down over the years, which is a good thing. It used to be 2005 and 2006 that if you could fog a wine glass, you'd qualify. And we saw the outcome of that and what happened with that. But um, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about doctors or people who work within the same industry. So a lot of times there's a misconception. We'll start with people who are taking on a new job. Let's say someone's moving into this area, getting transferred, and they're working with a new company. And in their mind, they're thinking, I don't qualify because I don't have 2 years worth of, I was told I needed 2 years worth of statements from it. But you can qualify by being in the same field, so to speak. So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so physicians one is specifically that we can actually work with, that there are physician loans. And what those are really geared towards is they're going to utilize the time that you've spent in school towards your work history. So it's not like you have to have this 2 years out of school making money, and we have to document those 2 years. They also come with some options where they're lower down payments, assuming you haven't been out of school working as much, you haven't saved up as much. So physicians specifically, there's some great programs. But even still, even if you're not a physician, a lot of people don't recognize this, but we can utilize school history. So, if you've went to school for a profession and that required, specialized training, and we can document the training that you went on, that you had in that time frame, we can utilize that towards that 2-year history that we need. And then secondly, it doesn't have to be in the same job. It has to be essentially the same line of work, but there's a lot of liberty there.
Yeah.
We can a lot of times group things together where it's still the same or similar line of work. So we can use that 2-year history. So just because you've changed jobs or, maybe just took a job, that doesn't necessarily mean we can't get you qualified. But it does get into, there's some different caveats to it. So you want to communicate what you have going on so we can make sure that doesn't present any challenges for you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know in my past, because I've been in sales for my whole life, that we've had that come up with several homes that we've bought. And in each case, we were able to kind of document and show that, yes, I changed companies if there was less than 2 years, but I'm in the same field of sales, so it's just an advancement essentially.
Another one is we have had where, if someone's going from W-2 to like self-employed 1099, it becomes more difficult. So I don't want to present this as we can do all of those, but if it was in the same line of work, there is the potential of using that past history. So, there's certain situations where it was like they were a doctor working for the hospital and it was as a W-2, and now they're going to be taking that same basically position on, but it's being paid as a 1099. And previously it was dead in the water. You don't have your 2-year history as self-employed. You got to call us back in 2 years. Now there are options available. I would just, again, encourage you to have those conversations because you'd be surprised how many different solutions there are out there nowadays.
Yeah. And I know as myself, when I was W-2 as a salesperson, and then when I started earning more money, I realized there was a benefit to being a corporation and taking my pay instead of on a W-2 as a corporation. And then buying a house after that and ran into that exact scenario. And it was able to be, the lender at that time was able to work that out. So, these things aren't obstacles. They're just, they are obstacles, but they're just things that there's solutions to. And that's why people like you and me are so essential in this process, because you can Google a million things and get a million answers on Google, or I guess it's Chat GTP now, but take a seasoned professional and take advice from them and follow the advice, because that's really what's going to work, because we've been through it so many times. Well, I want to wrap up right now. First of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for doing this, Rich. And for anyone that wasn't able to get a question in, because I forgot to turn on the chat box with it, if you just text me or email me, because that information will be available when this gets put out as a video within a few days, feel free to text us any of those questions, because I always do answer them, and can always forward on to Rich questions specifically for him too. So anyway, thanks again, Rich. We look forward to another session with you at some point in time. And as always, I appreciate you. And I will post Rich's contact information within the video, so everyone will have that. And that usually takes 2 to 3 days to come out. So anyway, Rich, thanks so much. God bless you, and have a great day.
Absolutely. I appreciate it again, Dave. It's been a pleasure. Have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.